Rain lashed Atlanta like a punishment, turning the streets into rivers of gray. Elias Eli Jackson stood beneath it, soaked to the marrow, his delivery van wheezing behind him like an old dog on its last legs. 32 years old, skin dark against the faded uniform that hung loose on his wiry frame, he gripped a small package under one arm, water streaming off his cap and pooling in the creases of his face. The neon glow of Titan Ventures loomed above a glass and steel monolith that screamed wealth, power, and untouchable pride. To them, he was nothing. A shadow in a wet jacket, a delivery guy with a rusted van. But shadows see things the light misses. And Alyssa's eyes dark, steady, sharp as a blade, caught everything. The automatic doors hissed open, and a wave of air-conditioned chill slapped him as he stepped into the lobby. Jake Russo, Titan's golden boy and head of the investment team, leaned against the reception desk, his tailored suit crisp against the dripping mess of Ellis' figure. His voice sliced through the hum of the room, loud and mocking. "Well, look who crawled in. The delivery clown finally graces us. What's the holdup, genius? Lose your way in that rain? Or did that junk heap van finally drown?" Laughter erupted from the knot of suits behind him, sharp, barking, like hyenas circling a kill. Ryan, a wiry punk with gelled hair and a smirk, lobbed an empty soda can through the air. It struck Ila's shoulder with a dull thunk and clattered to the marble floor. "Pick it up, man," Ryan snickered, crossing his arms. "That's your big talent, right? Cleaning up our trash?" Eli didn't flinch. He bent down, slow and deliberate, scooping the can into his pocket. His face stayed blank, a mask carved from stone, but his knuckles whitened around the package, and his mind churned. "Keep laughing," he thought, the words a quiet growl in his skull. "Every one of those laughs is a brick you'll bury you under." He straightened, meeting Jake's eyes for a split second, long enough to see the smugness. Not long enough for Jake to catch the steel beneath. They never did. To them, he was a ghost, a nobody, a punchline in a gray uniform. That was their first mistake. "Here's your crap," Eli said, voice low and flat, handing over the package. Jake snatched it, his smirk twisting wider. "Careful. Don't drop it, you slow-ass moron. This ain't your grandma's junk mail. We're moving millions here. Not that you'd know what a million looks like." The room cackled again, a chorus of contempt that bounced off the polished walls. Eli nodded once, turned, and headed for the door, the rain waiting to swallow him whole. But as he passed the desk, his fingers brushed the edge of the package Jake had tossed aside. A single sheet slipped loose, creased, stamped confidential, numbers bleeding red across the page. Quick as a thief, Eli palmed it, tucking it into his jacket before Tara, the receptionist, could lift her bored eyes from her phone. Outside, the storm roared, drowning the city's pulse. Eli climbed into the van, the driver's seat groaning under him, and sat there, water dripping onto the cracked vinyl. He pulled the paper out, smoothing it against the steering wheel. It was a financial report, losses in stark red ink, words like collapse and default jumping out like warning flares. Titan Ventures, the invincible empire, was crumbling behind its glass facade. Ellis' lips twitched, a ghost of a smirk. "You think you're untouchable," he thought, staring at the numbers. "You think I'm nothing. But I've been watching longer than you have been winning." He wasn't just a delivery guy, not really. Years ago, he'd sat in a community college classroom, scribbling notes on cash flow and mergers while his mom stitched factory rags to pay the bills. He'd worked as an analyst, flipped a dying business for profit, learned how to read a company's pulse through its numbers. Life had kicked him down her death. The bills, the grind, but it hadn't dulled his edge. It had sharpened it, honed it into something quiet and lethal, and now Titan had handed him a blade. Eli folded the paper, his mind already racing. "They don't see me," he thought, the engine sputtering to life. "But they will. And when they do, they'll choke on every word they've spit at me." He drove into the downpour, the report a live wire in his pocket. This wasn't just a wet day gone wrong. This was the first cut, and Eli was ready to carve deep. The rain had faded to a drizzle by the time Eli pulled his van into the lot behind his apartment, a crumbling brick box tucked on Atlanta's ragged edge. The engine coughed out, leaving a hollow silence, and he sat there staring at the windshield as water streaked down in thin, jagged veins. The stolen Titan Ventures report lay crumpled on the passenger seat. its red numbers glaring like fresh-cut millions lost, a startup bleeding out, a company teetering on lies. Ellis' fingers twitched, itching to unfold it again, but he didn't need to. He'd burned the figures into his brain the second he'd seen them. This wasn't just a leak in their shiny tower. It was a fracture he could widen, a crack he could split open with his bare hands. He grabbed the paper and stepped out, boots splashing in shallow puddles as he climbed the rusted stairs to his place. The metal groaned under his weight, a familiar complaint from a building that had seen better days, much like him. Inside, the air was thick with damp carpet and stale coffee, a one-room cave lit by a single flickering bulb. A sagging couch slumped against one wall, a counter piled with takeout boxes against another. But the heart of the space was a small table in the corner. A laptop with a cracked screen glowed faintly beside a stack of notebooks. Gishaj yellowed, edges curled, scribbled with numbers and half-drawn plans from years ago. Eli dropped the report onto the pile, the wet thud of it loud in the quiet, and peeled off his soaked jacket. It hit the floor with a heavy slap, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the day, the voices, the weight of their words. Jake Russo's sneer cut through first, sharp and venomous. "What's the holdup, genius? Did that junk heap van finally drown?" Ellis' jaw tightened, teeth grinding, as the laughter echoed in his skull, those hyena barks from the lobby, Ryan's soda can bouncing off his shoulder. "Pick it up. Man, that's your big talent, right?" It wasn't the first time. Weeks ago, Jake had kicked an empty water bottle across the marble floor, grinning as Eli chased it down. "Hurry up, you slow-ass piece of trash, think that raggedy van's a Rolls-Royce." 2 months back, delivering a stack of files, Lisa summed pencil skirt shark with a smirk. Hattie leaned over her desk. "Don't trip over your own feet, delivery boy. Those papers are worth more than your whole damn life." The laughs followed him out every time, a chorus of contempt that clung like damp rot. Then there was the meeting he'd caught last month, dropping a late package on the top floor. The conference room door was ajar, and Jake's voice boomed through the glass. "Imagine if that delivery idiot ran Titan Hell, would be investing in landfills and food stamps." Vanessa Pierce, the CEO with her cold eyes and colder smile, had tilted her head back, her laugh a razor's edge. "Don't even joke about it, Jake. He'd bankrupt us before he could spell profit, assuming he can even read." The room had exploded, a wave of mockery that crashed over Eli as he stood there, unseen, the package heavy in his hands. Had walked away without a word, but those words stuck needles under his skin, stoking a fire had kept banked for years. Eli sank into the chair at his table, the springs creaking, and pulled a framed photo from the drawer. His mom stared back, her smile worn but warm, captured in a faded snapshot from before the factory broke her. Shed worked double shifts at a textile mill, hands raw from the machines just to put him through school. "Don't let him step on you, Eli," Shed said once, her voice rough after a long night, her fingers bandaged from needle pricks. "They'll laugh, they'll shove, but you're more than they'll ever see. Stand taller, build something they can't touch." Shed died when he was 22, worn to nothing by the grind, and had buried her with that promise carved into his soul. Had tried to keep it college finance courses, late nights cracking books on cash flow and mergers, a gig as an analyst at a small firm downtown. He'd been good, sharp-flipped a dying print shop into a $500,000 sale at 23, saw the patterns in numbers others missed. But when her lungs gave out, the bills piled up, and had traded the suit for a van. Delivery paid fast. The dream got shelved. Until now. Eli smoothed the Titan report, his eyes tracing the red ink. This wasn't just a company faltering, it was a beast bleeding out, and he knew how to finish it. He'd seen it before, back in his analyst days. Over-leveraged firms, bloated egos, cracks no one patched until the walls caved in. Titan was worth $20 million sunk into a startup that didn't work, clients bolting, a stock price floating on hot air and lies. Jake and Vanessa thought they could bury it, thought their suits and sneers made them invincible. They're not, Eli thought, his mind slicing through their facade. They're sloppy, too loud, too blind. Although I've been counting their mistakes longer than they've counted their wins. He leaned back, the chair groaning, and let the realization settle. This wasn't about luck. He'd been invisible to them for 2 years, delivering their coffee, their files, their secrets, and that was his blade. They didn't know he'd sat in classrooms breaking down balance sheets while they partied through business school. They didn't know he'd turned a failing shop around while they were still kissing ass for internships. They saw the van, the uniform, the skin, and stopped looking. Their loss, he thought, a flicker of something hard crossing his face. My gain. But he needed more than a report and a grudge. He needed kitsch, a partner, a way to strike. His fingers brushed an old wallet on the table, flipping it open to a creased business card. Carmen Ortiz, venture capitalist, had met her years back at a free finance seminar, a wiry woman with a smoker's rasp and eyes like a hawk. He'd asked sharp questions, how to spot a dying firm, how to flip it, and Shed liked his edge. You've got a head for this, kid, Shed said, tossing him the card. Call me when you're ready to play the real game. Life had derailed him, but the card stayed, a lifeline he'd forgotten until now. Eli grabbed his phone, the screen cracked but alive, and dialed. It rang twice before her voice cut through, rough and alive. Ortiz, who's this? He took a breath, the fire in his chest flaring bright. Eli Jackson, you told me to call when I was ready. I've got something biggest fish I've ever seen, bleeding out and begging for a harpoon. You in? Silence stretched. Then Carmen laughed, a low, jagged sound that promised blood. Well, damn, kid, took you long enough. Spill it everything. I'm listening. Eliz's grip tightened on the phone, the report glowing red under the bulb. They think I'm dirt, he thought, the words a vow. But dirt's where you plant roots, and I'm about to grow something they'll never climb. The game was on. Eli hung up the phone, Carmen Ortiz jagged laugh still slicing through his skull like a serrated edge. Meet me tomorrow, 8 p.m. downtown. Bring everything you've got, Shed said, her voice a spark that ignited the dry tinder of his resolve. Sleep wasn't an option that night. His apartment was a crypt of shadows, the single bulb flickering over his table like a dying ember. Rain tapped the window in a restless staccato as he spread out his haul. The stolen Titan Ventures report from 2 days ago, its red ink screaming losses. A fistful of torn memos he'd fished from trash bins over months. A delivery log scratched onto a pizza box, dates, names, fragments of conversations he'd stitched together like a patchwork of their ruin. This wasn't a whim. This was a calculated strike, and Eli was loading the chamber. He leaned over the papers, the chair groaning under his weight, his breath steady, but his mind racing like a machine jolted back to life. The numbers painted a grim mural, $20 million sunk into a startup that couldn't deliver, clients bolting, a stock price floating on lies and bravado. But it was more than data. It was a ledger of their arrogance, every misstep a mark he'd tracked since Jake Russo's first sneer in that rain-soaked lobby. They've been bleeding out right under my nose, he thought, tracing a line of red ink with a calloused finger. And I've been the only one keeping score. His old analyst days surged back late nights dissecting failing firms, spotting the fractures before they split wide. Titan wasn't just stumbling, it was a beast on its knees, and Eli was ready to drive the spear. Morning broke gray and damp, the city glistening under a shroud of mist. Eli pulled on his uniform, the fabric stiff from drying overnight, and climbed into the van. The engine sputtered to life, a tired growl that mirrored the ache in his bones, but he hit the road with a clarity sharper than ever. Every stop, offices, warehouses, strip malls, was a rehearsal now, his eyes scanning, ears tuned. Titan Ventures was the main stage. He wasn't just hauling packages anymore, he was stalking, a ghost in gray polyester weaving through their polished halls, and they were too drunk on their own hype to see the noose tightening. He rolled into Titan's lobby at 10 a.m., a stack of envelopes under his arm, the air hitting him with its usual blast of cold and smugness. Jake Russo strutted across the marble, phone glued to his ear, his voice a jackhammer. Yeah, well, bury this, no one's gonna know that startup's a dumpster fire. Tell him it's a glitch. Stall him till we're in the clear. He didn't glance at Eli as he slid the stack onto the reception desk. Tara, the blonde behind the counter, barely lifted her eyes from her manicured nails, scrawling her name on the clipboard with a lazy flick. Move it, delivery boy, she muttered, popping her gum, her tone dripping with disdain. Eli nodded. his face a blank mask, but his gaze snagged on the trash bin beside her, overflowing with coffee cups, crumpled Post-its, and a shredded page jutting out like a broken rib. The word liabilities glared in bold black, a tear slicing through a figure. 8 million. His pulse kicked up, a steady drumbeat in his chest. He lingered, pretending to fumble with his clipboard, his back to Tara as she scrolled her phone. The lobby buzz phones ringing, heels clicking, and it cloaked the soft rustle as he palmed the scrap and tucked it into his sleeve. But this time he wasn't alone. Mark, a lanky accountant with wire-rimmed glasses, paused nearby, adjusting a stack of folders. His eyes flicked to Eli, narrowing for a split second, then darted to Tara. "Hey, Tara," Mark called, voice casual but edged. "You see that guy rooting through the trash again?" Tara snorted, not looking up. "What, the delivery grunt? He's just a creep in your him. Jake says he's harmless." Mark shrugged, moving on, but Eli caught the glance, a flicker of doubt dismissed too fast. Close, he thought, slipping out the door, the scrap burning in his pocket, but not close enough. They're blind because they want to be. Back in the van, he locked the doors and spread the torn paper beside the report. It was a balance sheet fragment: $8 million in unpaid vendor debts, $5 million tied up in a lawsuit from a client who jumped ship. He pieced it together, his mind clicking like a lock tumbling open. The startup was a $20 million abyss. Lawsuits were piling up, and Titan was drowning in red they couldn't hide much longer. He'd caught more over the week's shards of their collapse he'd stitched into a noose. 3 days ago, delivering toner to the 4th floor, he'd lingered by the copier room where Jake was yelling at an assistant, "Shredded every damn page. If those numbers hit the street, we're toast." Eli had faked a clipboard check, nabbed a half-torn memo from the shredder's tray details of a $2 million hush payment to a startup founder who'd threatened to talk. Last week, dropping files on the top floor, he'd heard Vanessa through a cracked conference room door, her voice a venomous hiss. "Keep it quiet, Jake. We'll ride this out, bleed the smaller fish dry, shift the blame. No one's digging deep enough to catch us." Had stood there, unseen, the weight of her words sinking like lead. They're not just sloppy, he thought now, staring at his haul. They're desperate, and desperation's where I cut deepest. Eli knew this dance. Had flipped that print shop at 23, spotted the overpaid staff, the bad leases, cut the fat, sold it for $500,000. Titan was a bigger beast, but the moves were the same. Find the bleed, choke it, claim it. He didn't have the cash, his van barely ran, but he had the map, the nerve, and Carmen Ortiz. That night he met her at the Rusty Nail, a dive bar downtown where the air reeked of whiskey and grease. She slid into the booth across from him, blazer sharp against the cracked leather, a bourbon in her hand. 50-something, with a smoker's rasp and eyes like a hawk. Carmen had clawed her way up from East LA streets, flipping startups while others crashed. A predator in a suit. Eli remembered her from that seminar years back, her no-nonsense talk about winners and losers. She'd seen his edge then, and now she sized him up again. "All right, delivery boy," she said, sipping her drink. "You dragged me out here. Show me the goods." Eli spread his arsenal across the table, the report, the shredded scrap, the memo, his notebook scratched with numbers and arrows. "Titan's dying," he said, voice steady, eyes locked on hers. 20 million down the drain on a startup that's all smoke. 5 mil in lawsuits, 8 mil in debts. They can't pay. Jake's burying reports, Vanessa's bleeding small investors to plug the holes there, a house of cards in a hurricane. He tapped the notebook. "I've been in their shadows 2 years, counting every misstep, every lie. Small shareholders are panicking, selling cheap. We scoop 51%, we own it, cut the rot, rebuild it, cash out big." Carmen swirled her bourbon, her gaze narrowing, dissecting him. "You're a damn ghost," Eli slipping through their trash, picking their bones. "How long you been sitting on this?" "Long enough," he said, leaning forward. 2 years hauling their coffee, their files, their egos. They don't see men ever have. I've been breaking down companies since I was 20, flipped a print shop for $500,000 while they were still kissing ass for MBAs. This isn't a grudge. Carmen, it's a dissection." She chuckled, rough and alive. I've seen sharks in suits lose everything to guys like you, hungry, quiet, pissed off as hell. You're sure you can gut this fish? Ellis' jaw tightened, his voice dropping low. I'm not gutting it, I'm carving it up and feeding it back to them. I've mapped every weak spot, every artery. All I need's your cash and a green light. Carmen set her glass down with a sharp clink, her grin widening. $500,000 to start Nova Acquisitions. Our shell. I'll work the money, you work the shadows. Don't screw me, Eli don't back losers. I don't lose, he shot back, meeting her stare head on. The next 3 weeks were a high-wire act over a pit of fire. Eli kept his routine van rumbling through dawn traffic. Packages stacked in the back. Titans lobby a daily gauntlet. Carmen worked the phones, buying shares from jittery investors, $50 here, $100 there, quiet deals that stayed off the grid. Inside Titan, the seams ripped wider. He'd catch Jake in the halls, tie loose, yelling into his phone, "Shred it, burn it, I don't care, just bury that report." While 2 days ago, delivering to the 5th floor, he'd seen Mark again, the accountant, hunched over a desk, muttering to a colleague, "Something's off, those numbers don't add up." The colleague waved him off. Jake says it's fine, drop it. Eli slipped past unseen, a ghost in their chaos. One afternoon, he dropped a bomb on the 6th floor, catching Jake mid-rant outside the conference room. "Tell him it's under control," Jake snapped, sweat beading on his forehead, his voice cracking like glass. "No one's touching Titan, we're golden." A junior exec nearby, Tom, a wiry guy with a nervous tick frown, whispering to another, "He's losing it, what if someone's onto us?" The other shrugged. "Who? The janitor?" "Relax." Eli kept his head down, sliding the box onto a table, but his ears burned. "On to you," he thought, a cold smirk flickering in his mind. "Been ahead of you for years, you just didn't see the track." That night, he met Carmen at a diner off Peachtree, her grin feral as she slid a greasy napkin across the table. 40%, she said, tapping it with a chipped nail. 10 more and we've got him by the throat. Ready to twist the knife? Eli took a pull from his coffee, the bitter heat steadying his racing pulse. "I've been ready," he said, voice low and hard. "They've got no damn clue what's coming." The fire in his gut was a furnace now. Every trash, every moron, every laugh, a brick in his wall, and he was about to drop it on their skulls. They think they're sharks, he thought, staring into the night beyond the diner's grimy window. But I've been swimming deeper, longer, with sharper teeth, and I'm about to bite. The shadow game was winding down. The reckoning was loaded and cocked. Friday evening draped Atlanta in a humid shroud, the sun bleeding into the horizon as it sank behind Titan Venture's glass tower. Inside, the air crackled with a desperation so raw, Eli could feel it crawl up his spine, sharp, electric, like a storm about to break. He stepped into the lobby for his last delivery of the week, a boss of printer paper tucked under his arm, mundane as dirt, but loaded with intent. The usual buzz of arrogance had crumbled, replaced by a frantic hum phones shrilling unanswered. Assistants darting between offices with folders clutched like shields, voices snapping in jagged bursts. Jake Russo's hoarse roar echoed from the top floor. "I don't give a damn what they say, fix it now or we're all sunk." Eli kept his head down, the gray uniform swallowing him into the shadows. But his pulse thrummed like a taut wire strung to snap. This wasn't just a drop-off. This was the execution. He took the elevator to the 6th floor, the hum sinking with the furnace in his chest, and slipped into the conference room to set down the box. The scene was a battlefield, papers strewn across the long glass table, coffee cups toppled in brown-stained heaps, the air thick with sweat and dread. Vanessa Pierce stood at the head, her designer suit creased and wilted, her icy composure shattered into shards of rage. She slammed a stack of reports down, her voice a whip crack that sliced the room. "We're hemorrhaging cash, you incompetent fools. That startup's a rotting corpse. The clients are gone. We're 2 weeks from bankruptcy if we don't find a lifeline, and I'm not sinking with this ship." Her Team 10 suits, pale and rigid, sat like statues caught in a blast, eyes darting, hands twitching. Jake Russo sprawled in his chair, arms crossed, tie loose and sweat-stained, forcing a grin that flickered like a dying bulb. Relax, Vanessa, he barked, voice rough but loud enough to drown the panic. He'll pull some strings, lock down a new investor by Monday. No one's better at this than me. We're solid. Trust me, I've got this. Eli placed the box on a side table, slow and deliberate, his shadow stretching across the carpet like a stain they couldn't see. No one noticed him. Not Jake, not Vanessa, not Tom, the wiry junior exec with a nervous tick who'd whispered doubts yesterday. He was a ghost, same as always, and that was his dagger. He turned to leave, boots silent on the plush floor, but Vanessa's next words stopped him cold. Solid? You arrogant jackass. We're dead if this leaks. 20 million down the drain. Lawsuits piling up. You've screwed us all, Jake, and it'll be damned if I take the fall. The room froze, her admission a live wire sparking in the silence. Jake's grin faltered, his jaw clenching, a vein pulsing in his neck. Watch your mouth, Vanessa, he growled, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous edge. I've kept this ship afloat. You'd be nothing without me. I've buried bigger problems than this. Ila's hand brushed the doorframe, and for a split second, a cold smirk flickered across his face, gone before anyone could catch it. You've buried nothing, he thought, the words a steel blade in his mind. I've been digging your grave for years, and it's time to drop you in. He'd locked it down that morning with Carmen Ortiz, the final piece slamming into place like a bolt on a guillotine. She'd called at dawn, her voice crackling through the line like lightning. 51%, Eli. We've got it signed, sealed, delivered. You ready to burn their house down and piss on the ashes? Had met her at her office, a sleek high-rise 10 blocks from Titan, where she'd handed him a thick manila envelope, contracts, shareholder agreements, proof of ownership stamped in stark black ink. Nova Acquisitions, their shadow shell, now held the reins. Eli had run his fingers over the pages, feeling the weight of every moron, every trash, every laugh they'd flung at him since that rain-soaked day in the lobby 2 years back. Let's do it, he'd said, voice steady as bedrock. Carmen's grin had been feral, her eyes glinting like a predator's. Go get 'em, kid. Make it bleed. Now, as 5 p.m. ticked closer, Eli ditched the uniform in his van, swapping it for a black suit cheap, a little tight across the shoulders, but it fit like a second skin now, armor for the fight. He grabbed the envelope and walked back into Titan, head high, boots striking the marble with a rhythm that echoed his pulse, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. The lobby was half empty, staff trickling out for the weekend, oblivious to the tempest brewing upstairs. He took the elevator again, the ride a slow ascent to the slaughter. When the door slid open on the 6th floor, he stepped out, gray ghost gone, black blade in its place. The conference room doors were still ajar, voices spilling out, Vanessa's sharp and fraying, Jake's loud and cracking like brittle ice. Eli didn't knock. He pushed through, the envelope heavy in his hand, and every head snapped toward him. Silence crashed down like a sledgehammer. Vanessa blinked, her mouth half open mid-sentence, her pen hovering over a report. Jake's eyes narrowed, then widened as recognition hit like a freight train. What the hell, he started, but Eli cut him off, voice calm and cold as a winter blade. Titan doesn't need saving, Eli said, stepping to the center of the room, his shadow swallowing the table. It's already mine. The words detonated like a bomb. Vanessa's pen clattered to the glass, a sharp plink piercing the stillness. Jake shot to his feet, chair screeching back, his face reddening like a furnace. What the fuck is this? He roared, fists balling, spit flying as he leaned over the table. Eli didn't flinch. He tossed the envelope onto the glass, papers spilling out, contracts, signatures, the Nova Acquisitions logo glaring up like a death sentence. As of this morning, he said slow and deliberate, each word a hammer strike, I own 51% of Titan Ventures. You're done. Vanessa snatched at the papers, her hands trembling as she scanned them, her breath hitching like a broken engine. This is impossible, she stammered, her voice cracking, eyes wild as she searched for a foothold in the rubble. You're that filthy delivery rat. She looked up, desperation clawing at her face. But Eli met her stare, unblinking, his voice a quiet, lethal edge. Yeah, Vanessa the rat who's been counting your mistakes longer than you've counted your money. 2 years of your trash, Your lies, your laughs, have mapped every crack you didn't see, every hole you dug. You're not slipping out of this one. Jake lunged forward, slamming his fists on the table, the glass shuddering under the blow, a spiderweb of cracks blooming from the impact. You lying piece of shit, he bellowed, veins bulging in his forehead, his voice a raw snarl. You think you can waltz in here with some fake-ass papers and steal my company? I've buried bigger rats than you will have you in chains by morning, you hear me? It'll sue you back to that rusted van. He grabbed the contracts, tearing at them like a rabid dog. But Eli pulled a recorder from his pocket and hit play. Jake's own voice crackled through, smug and panicked from a call Eli had caught weeks back. Cheat it, bury it, no one's gonna know that startup's a pile of crap. We're untouchable. The team gasped, heads whipping toward Jake, whose face drained to a sickly gray, his hands freezing mid-tier. Chains? Eli said, pocketing the recorder, his tone ice-cold and cutting. That's just the appetizer, Jake. I've got months of you every boast, every cover-up, every dime you skimmed. You're not burying me, you're all red 6 feet under, and I've got the shovel. He turned to Vanessa, who sat rigid, clutching the ruined papers. You too, Pierce, 300,000 you funneled offshore, signed on every fraud you thought you'd burned. You're not fighting chains, you're fighting a hanging. Vanessa straightened, a flicker of her old steel flashing through her panic, her voice trembling but sharp. You've got nothing but papers, you little punk, she snapped, eyes narrowing. You'll tie this up in court for years. By the time I'm done, you'll be begging for scraps in that filthy uniform again. You don't know who you're messing with. The threat hung heavy, a desperate claw at control, and Tom, the junior exec, nodded faintly from the back, whispering to Mark, she's got a point to legal could stall this. Eli tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Court, good luck, Vanessa. I've got your signature on every fraud $300,000 offshore, $2 million in hush payments, emails you didn't delete, memos you didn't shred. I've got the receipts from your trash, 2 years of it, and you're not stalling anything. You're done. He leaned in, eyes boring into hers. You should have looked closer at the dirt you kicked around. It's been burying you all along. Jake roared, a guttural sound that shook the room, and charged around the table, his face twisted in fury. You're dead, you hear me? It'll kill you, you goddamn roach. He swung wild, his fist clipping the table's edge, and the glass shattered with a sickening crack. Shards flying like shrapnel, blood streaking his knuckles. He lunged again, eyes feral, but 2 security guards burst in, summoned by a trembling assistant, grabbing his arms mid-swing. Get off me, Jake thrashed, veins popping, his tie flapping like a noose, his voice a ragged scream. This punk's nothing. I'll sue him into the ground, watch me rip him apart. Blood dripped onto the carpet as the guards hauled him back, his curses echoing down the hall. Eli stepped closer, voice low and cutting through the chaos. Sue me? You've got no ground to stand on, jockey no money, no company, no spine. You're out. He turned to Vanessa, who sat frozen, a ghost in her chair, her hands shaking. You two, Pierce, clear your office. 1 hour. You're finished. He paused, looking around the room, his gaze landing on Tom and Mark, who shrank back. Anyone else want to try me? Speak now or get ready to work. Jake spat, still struggling as the guards dragged him to the elevator. You're trash. Always will be my world, my rules. Eli didn't blink, his voice steady, a faint smirk returning. Not anymore, Jake. Now it's mine, and I've been running circles around you for years. You just didn't see the track. The room was a graveyard, stunned faces, broken glass, the air thick with shock and blood. Vanessa's head dropped into her hands, a choked sob breaking free, her empire crumbling into dust. Jake's curses faded into the elevator's hum, a hollow echo of a man undone. Eli stood amid the wreckage, papers scattered like confetti, his suit a stark silhouette against the chaos. He'd done it, the twist was complete. The delivery guy they'd mocked, the shadow they'd ignored, had just slit their throats with their own arrogance. But this wasn't the end. He turned to the team, voice slicing through the silence like a honed edge. Anyone who wants to stay, get ready to work harder than you've ever worked. The rest, follow them out. This place changes now. His eyes burned, not with triumph, but with a steady, unrelenting purpose. They thought they'd buried me, he thought, the fire in his gut a quiet blaze. But I've been digging my way up 2 years of their dirt, their spit, their blindness. Now I'm standing on their graves, and am just getting started. The real war was about to ignite. The conference room was a shattered shell when the storm broke. Shards of glass glittered on the carpet like jagged teeth. Blood smeared the cracked table where Jake Russo's fist had landed, and the air hung heavy with the reek of desperation and defeat. Vanessa Pierce slumped in her chair, hands trembling over the torn contracts, her face a ruin of streaked mascara and disbelief, her breath shallow and ragged. The Titan Ventures team executives, analysts, assistants stared at Eli Jackson in a silence so thick it pressed against the walls, their eyes wide, mouths slack, as if the world had tilted off its axis. He stood at the center, black suit clinging to his frame, the envelope's papers scattered like ashes at his feet. The delivery guy they had mocked for years had just razed their empire to the ground. And the echoes of Jake's fading screams still lingered like smoke. Eli let the moment breathe, the weight of it sinking into every stunned face. Ryan with his soda cans, Lisa with her sneers, Tom with his whispered doubts, the rest who'd laughed while he'd hauled their trash. Then he spoke, voice low and firm, cutting through the haze like a blade through fog. This company's been rotting for years, bad deals, worse lies, and a whole lot of dead weight sitting pretty while it bled dry. His gaze swept the room, pinning each one where they sat, his eyes burning with a quiet, unrelenting fire. Some of you are done right here, right now, Jake and Vanessa. They're gone out the door and out of this game for good. But I'm not here to play petty revenge or dance on their graves. I'm here to fix what you let break. Anyone who wants to stay, you better be ready to work harder than you've ever worked. Smarter than they ever did. The rest of you, there's the exit. Choose now. Vanessa's head snapped up, her voice a broken thread as she clutched the table's edge, her nails scraping the glass. You can't just, Eli stepped closer, his shadow swallowing her, his tone cold and unyielding as steel. I can, and I did. You're not just fired, Vanessa, you're finished. I've got your paper trail, 300,000 you and Jake siphoned off, every fake report you sign, every memo you thought you'd burned. You're looking at lawsuits that'll strip you to the bone. Maybe a cell if the lawyers dig deep, and they will. Clear your office 1 hour, clock's running. Her lips quivered, a choked sob escaping as she pushed herself up, unsteady on her heels. She grabbed her bag, fingers fumbling, and shuffled out, head bowed, her designer heels clicking a funeral march down the hall. The room watched her go, a queen dethroned in disgrace, her empire crumbling into dust. Jake's fate was a darker, uglier cut, and Eli had sharpened the blade himself. He'd handed Carmen the recordings that morning, months of Jake's boasts and cover-ups, every snarled "bury it" captured in crisp audio, a noose of his own making. By Monday, the lawyers would have it, clawing back the $300,000 Jake had funneled into a personal account from Titan's dying startup money he'd bragged about splashing on a boat named Untouchable, now a bitter joke. Eli didn't stop there. He turned to the team, voice sharp as a guillotine, eyes locking on the ones who'd fueled the rot. Ryan, you're out. Throwing that can didn't make you clever, just loud. Pack your crap. Ryan's smirk vanished, his face paling as he stood, muttering a string of curses under his breath, his bravado leaking out like air from a punctured tire. Lisa, you're gone too. Can't read, huh? Go wipe tablet, see how far your tongue gets you now. Lisa flinched, her heels clicking a frantic retreat, eyes darting like a trapped rat's. He kept going, naming the leeches Tom included, the junior exec who'd whispered doubts but never acted. Tom, you saw the cracks and sat on your hands. Out. Tom's tick twitched, his protest dying in his throat as he slunk away. 5 in all, they filed out, heads down, a parade of ghosts leaving their own wreckage behind. But Eli wasn't here to torch it all and walk away. He turned to the dozen left faces, pale but eyes sharp, hands still on the table, a flicker of grit in their stares. Priya sat near the back, a quiet analyst with dark circles under her eyes, her reports buried under Jake's bluster for years. Eli pointed at her, voice steady. You've seen your work. Those projections you slipped in the trash because Jake wouldn't listen? They're gold better than anything he ever touched. You're staying step up. Priya blinked, then nodded, her jaw tightening with a spark of steel. He kept going, picking the ones who'd done the real grind mark from accounting, who'd flagged the startup's losses early up only to be ignored. Tara from reception, who'd signed his deliveries without a sneer. Mark, you've got a head for numbers. Use it. Tara, you've seen this place run. Speak up. You're in. We've got a shot here, but it's going to be a fight a damn bloody one. The cleanup was a slaughter, and Eli led it like a general on a raised field. That weekend, he and Carmen tore through Titan's carcass, working out of a borrowed office, a cramped room with peeling paint, a coffee machine hissing like a cornered snake, and a whiteboard scratched with plans. The startup $20 million flushed down a pipe dream was sold off for $50,000 to a tech scavenger who'd strip the code and vanish. A mercy kill. Eli cut every rotten deal Jake had locked in $2 million to overpriced consultants who'd spun hot air, $1.5 million to a shady PR firm peddling lies saving millions in dead-end contracts. He dug into the financials, found the $300,000 Jake and Vanessa had skimmed, and handed it to Carmen with a single command. Get it back every cent or lock 'em up. By Monday, lawsuits were filed: fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty clause sinking deep. Jake's untouchable would be auctioned to pay the tab. Vanessa's offshore account was frozen. Her designer wardrobe headed for the pawn shop. They weren't just out, they were broken. Their world stripped to bare bones. Then came the rebuild. Eli didn't fool himself. He wasn't some cape savior in a cheap suit. Titan was a husk, but it had a skeleton worth salvaging. A name with faded clout, a network of contacts, a handful of clients too stubborn to bail. With Carmen's $500,000 in his instincts, he pivoted hard. He pulled the $300,000 from Jake and Vanessa's clawback and pumped it into 3 small startups, lean teams with real ideas, not hype. Priya's projections picked the winners. A logistics app that landed a $10 million contract in 6 months, a biotech play that doubled its valuation in a funding round. Mark kept the books tight, slashing overhead, goodbye corner offices, hello shared desks, and cold coffee. Tara tracked the clients, her quiet voice cutting through with updates no one ignored now. 6 months later, Titan wasn't just breathing, it was clawing its way up, leaner, tougher, a phoenix forged from ash. The stock, once pennies on the dollar, tripled, and the industry buzzed with whispers of a comeback no one saw coming. Eli stood before the new team that last day, the cracked glass table replaced with a scratched oak one-less flash. More spine. His suit still pinched, but his shoulders were squared, his stance rooted like a tree grown from stone. They called me trash, he said, voice steady, eyes locking on each face: Priya's fierce gaze, Mark's quiet nod, Tara's steady hands. Told me I'd never be more than in a shadow with Avantuo years of their spit, their laughs, their dirt. But I didn't take this place to rub their faces in it. I took it because I saw what they couldn't, a chance to build something real, something they'll never touch. He paused, pulling his mom's photo from his pocket, tracing her worn smile with a callous thumb. They'll bury you because of where you start: your skin, your job, the scars they don't see. But this isn't just my when it's. For every shadow they've ignored, every voice they've drowned. We didn't beg for respect, we clawed up, carved this out, made it ours. That's the lesson. It's not where you begin that defines you, it's what you build from the dirt they throw. How you rise when they're blind to your roots. The room was still, but it wasn't fear, it was something heavier, something alive. Priya's jaw set, her eyes glinting with purpose. Mark cracked a rare smile, his pencil tapping the table. Tara clapped, a sharp sound that broke the quiet, and a few others joined, a ripple of grit and fire. Eli didn't smile back. He slipped the photo back into his pocket, whispering to it, I did it, Mom, not just for me, but for us. Then he looked up, fire steady in his eyes. We're not done climbing. Outside, Atlanta thrummed under a late summer sun, the city sprawling beneath Titan's tower. Jake was a ghost, last Eli heard. He'd sold his boat and car, holed up in a cheap motel screaming about revenge no one cared to hear. Vanessa had vanished, her office stripped bare, her name a cautionary whisper in boardrooms. The ones who'd laughed were shadows now, and Titans stood taller not on their lies, but on the roots Eli had planted in their dirt. He'd kept his promise to his mom, to himself, and the horizon was wide open.